Thanks. It's great to be here. I'm going to put myself on the clock so I don't talk too long, and then we have lots of times for questions. And I want to begin by recounting something that occurred about 5 or 6 years ago. My wife and I were at one of these conferences, and the conference was on aging and how to deal with aging. Now, how many people are interested in the subject of aging? Raise your hand. Okay. You know, you all are, I tell you. And at age 69, I'm deeply interested in the subject of aging. And they had psychiatrists and physicians and academics on this panel. And James Watson, who is the co-discoverer of DNA, the Nobel Prize winner, was also on the panel. And so they had the discussion, and it went on for an hour, and Watson said nothing. Sat at the end, 0 comments. Now, you know the power of silence was just overwhelming, and so finally the moderator, Charlie Rose, asked him, so Dr. Watson, you've done so much work, how do you deal with aging? And so he leaned into the microphone and he said, there's only one way to deal with aging, and that is stay away from old people. He nailed it. My wife Elsa and I were sitting behind Dr. Henry Kissinger, who was in the audience, and they handed out these little sheets where you did self-scoring and on your lifestyle. How often do you eat red meat? How many bowel movements do you have a week? General health questions, and then you got points or lost points and you added it up, and it told you how many years you had to live. Now, how many people here want to know how many years you have to live? As skeptical as you might rightly be about this scoring sheet, it's very interesting. And Kissinger was filling this out with all the intensity hunched over. And so Elsa and I availed ourselves of the Reporters' Freedom of Information Act and looked over his shoulder to see how many years he had to live. He added it all up, and it turned out he died 4 years ago. Not happy. I've seen Kissinger really unhappy because of things we'd written, but this was the depth of unhappiness. And so he looked around, and this was done in pencil, and he erased all the answers and rescored. Went through, and turns out the last time he ate red meat was 1949. How often do you exercise a week? 7, 8, 9, 10 times a week. And he rescored, and it turned out he had 8 years to live. Now, what's the lesson here? Kissinger is the master of this. Read his books, listen to him. He rescores history like no one else. But it is the basic problem in journalism, in trying to understand politics, trying to understand what's going on in the world. And I was telling the story the other night about Al Gore having dinner with him, sitting next to him. Now, having dinner sitting next to Al Gore is taxing. And as I say, it's really unpleasant. Asked him, how much do we know about what really goes on in the White House, the Clinton White House, and he said 1%. Low. I believe it's higher, but if you really kind of step back, we often don't know what's going on, and that's the dilemma. And I want to talk briefly and then answer questions about a new book I've done, which is just out, called The Price of Politics. It's about 3.5 years of negotiations between the Obama White House and the Republicans in Congress and the Democrats, how they essentially tried to bring the federal government's financial house into some kind of order. Now, the answer is they failed. We have a federal government whose financial house is in total disorder, total disarray. It is a historic problem. I covered these 3.5 years, but we're going to be back in the soup in about 4 or 5 months because, to try to put it in English, we have $16 trillion of IOUs outstanding in the world. And the negotiations last year, they agreed to raise what they called the debt ceiling so the government can borrow a couple more $1 trillion. We're going to run out of that borrowing authority January or February of next year, and so they're going to have to go back and get Congress to authorize more trillions of dollars of borrowing. As you know, the Republicans and lots of people in Congress don't want to authorize that. And so there is going to be a bloody negotiation unless they can work a deal. So in a sense, this is a book about the past, but it's about the present. It's about where we're going and kind of what the country's future is. And if you think about it, I would argue that the inability of the government to fix this borrowing, debt, deficit issues, the number one problem facing the country. In the book, Vice President Biden's chief of staff, Bruce Reed, runs around and says it was an economic Cuban Missile Crisis in 2011. That's exactly what it's going to be next year. And there is so much evidence that it's the biggest threat to the future of the country. It's something that has to be fixed. We are on the path to becoming Europe and Greece. You just can't keep borrowing money. There is a spending addiction in this country, and we need some sort of intervention, serious intervention. And in the book, what I attempt to do is take people to the meetings in the White House, Congress, or the meetings between the president and the leaders and show you exactly what happens. And because of the luxury of time and the generosity of the Washington Post and my publisher, Simon & Schuster, I had the time to get the meeting notes, to get the exact detail, to interview President Obama at length, and Speaker Boehner and the key players in this. And I just want to take one quick snapshot from what happened that we didn't know about, which is critical. And when the talks blew up last summer and the president was quite angry, quite upset, he called the congressional leaders to the White House over here Saturday morning, 11 o'clock, both the Democrats and the Republicans said we have to work out something. And the Democratic and Republican leaders were trying to work out their own deal. And Harry Reid, the Democratic leader, said to the president, "Mr. President, could you please leave the room?" Now, I've covered presidents for 40 years. I know of no other time anybody asked the president to leave the meeting in his own house that he had called. I asked the president about this, said, how did it feel to be voted off the island in your own house? Because that's what happened. And he said he was not going to stand on protocol, that the problem needed to be solved. But it wasn't, and the next day, he called the Democratic leaders to the White House, 6 o'clock on a Sunday night, and Harry Reid is there, Nancy Pelosi, the House leader, and the relations among the Democrats are so not solved that Harry Reid has his chief of